Evolving 360 million years ago, these peculiar looking trees actually predate the dinosaurs, an ancient species whose lineage has held on to this day, despite mass extinctions, ice ages, and well, just an extremely long time. These are living fossils, remaining unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. And the crazy thing is that they're not even technically trees. And they're certainly not meant to be found on a little island called Britain. But here they are, and rather surprisingly, they're thriving. I had a great time learning about this one, which was filmed at the stunning Treeberg Gardens in Cornwall, which is home to one of Britain's best subtropical gardens. We'll be hearing from head gardener Darren throughout this video too, but first, I think we need to understand quite exactly what these plants are. So, they're broadly called tree ferns, and while they do look like trees, they are actually in fact just ferns.
Tree ferns belong to an ancient group of species called pteridophytes.
They do not produce seeds, fruits or flowers like trees. They in fact reproduce from spores located beneath the leaves.
And unlike the earlier mosses or liverworts, tree ferns have vascular systems. So this means that they're able to transport water and nutrients efficiently, and it allows them to grow tall and colonize challenging environments.
This dark area here, which looks like the trunk of the tree, this is not hardwood. These are actually the old leaf bases and roots of the fern.
So they're great at taking in moisture through the stems, but where they really need the moisture when they're being established is in the crown, because you've got 3 years worth of fronds forming in like a V shape in the top. So there'll be 3 sort of years worth in there, so they will unfurl, but the others will still be forming inside.
And these rooty stems are the perfect substrate for other plants to grow from, and are what contribute to tree ferns' biodiversity value.
We often get the arboreal rhododendrons that we have around the garden. They generally sort of cross and naturalise, so you'll get all these sort of seedlings forming. Because the root sort of structure is quite damp, it tends to be perfect for seedlings just to sort of find their way into, and then they'll just naturally. I've even got a beech growing up the top.
Another beech up there. Oh yeah, you have, yeah, look. But you can see, yeah, so these roots are wrapping itself around the tree.
So yeah, literally going into the ground. So it's initially supported itself obviously off the stem, and then it's found its way.
This is a big one. This must be. This is the largest one I've seen so far here.
So yeah, this is one of the older specimens in the garden. As say, probably somewhere in the region of sort of 150, 160 years old.
Tree ferns evolved during the Carboniferous period, and they would have been the dominant species of a lost world, Gondwana, a massive ancient supercontinent which held together modern-day South America, Africa, Antarctica, Australia, New Zealand, India, and parts of the Middle East and Southeast Asia. This place was massive, and it's here that tree ferns established their ancient lineage. Could you imagine spawning into this lost world? Thick, warm air circulating amongst strange, towering conifers and cycads. And in the understory below, with a green, hazy twilight, you'd find tree ferns stretching up toward the light. There were no birds, no mammals, just the hum of giant insects, croaking amphibians, and the slither of early reptiles. And as Gondwana broke apart into the land masses which we know today, the tree ferns went with them, and they continued to subtly adapt into the species which we know today. But their basic structure and strategies remain the same today as the 360 million year old fossils. And why haven't they changed? Well, evolution doesn't always mean constant change. If a plan works, natural selection may preserve it. And in the case of tree ferns, they were, and still are, perfectly adapted to shade, moist forest environments.
So Darren, these tree ferns, these are probably some of your...
So these would have been the original plants that were brought in as ballast on the ships into Falmouth docks. And the story goes they unloaded them from the ships and they started to grow. So realising then that they would survive even being just sort of chopped off and loaded into a hold and transported across from Australia.
So to think that this tree started its life somewhere in Australia, do you know where from?
Would have been southeast Australia, so in the sort of tropical, sort of damper regions, I guess.
In its native range in Tasmania and southeastern Australia, Dicksonia antarctica is still relatively common, but it's under growing pressure from logging, land clearance, and increasingly intense bushfires. Conservation efforts focus on protecting remnant temperate rainforest, regulating harvesting, and promoting sustainable cultivation. This is all aimed at preserving this ancient species in the wild. Treeberg's Fern Valley is home to some incredible species from New Zealand. Here's Dickinsonia squarosa, fast growing and colony forming. It spreads by suckers and fills space very quickly.
Okay, so they can do a sort of co-dominant.
Yeah, that's it. So they just meld together eventually. So you often get sort of multi-stems, which are quite sort of quite fun in their own way. And I've actually seen them, interestingly enough, in Australia, planted as literally a fence. So they plant the stems together. And then they just meld together as a fence. So you have a living fence, which is quite fun.
That's awesome, yeah.
And here we have Dicksonia fibrosa, which is a bit slower, stockier, with a shaggier trunk and a more reserved presence.
So very much more tight form, narrow form to it. Very, very similar in looks with the fronds to your Dicksonia antarctica. But I say very much tighter, more fibrous stem. Not quite so sort of rooty.
And, of course, Cyathea delbata, the silver fern. Deep green on top with that famous silvery underside that once helped Maori navigate by moonlight.
Oh yeah, that's so striking.
Yeah.
The black is like, it's black. You know, sometimes in nature we say, oh, it's got a bluey look to it, but that is,
Yeah.
it's definitely black.
And it's the size of the fronds. It's the largest frond tree fern. So they're huge extending fronds, which really do make quite a statement.
Do you have a favourite?
This would probably have to be my favourite, just because it is so dramatic, and the fact that it sort of towers above you and creates such a sort of wide stance to it. But I think the nice thing about it, unlike Dicksonia antarctica, is it's actually quite open, so it actually lets the light through quite nicely. So you get that lovely sort of filtered light, which really makes those black sort of leaf stems really stand out.
And while it's the #1 priority to ensure that these species and their native habitats remain resilient and expand wherever possible, it's collections like this at Treebo which will ensure that these species live on, albeit over 10,000 miles away. But as always with non-natives within an island habitat like the UK, there can be cause for concern. And with these tree fern species that we've seen, while they are non-native, many of them haven't yet naturalised, apart from one, Dicksonia antarctica.
Because of the damp climate in Cornwall, and in particular at Treebo, because we have the sort of bit of tree canopy, you find them sort of naturalising on all these banks, and you see all the sort of spores, sort of sporelings appearing on in this sort of shadier, damper areas. I mean, it's a fantastic weed to have. We're very lucky. We have quite a concentration of them that were planted back in the sort of 1880s, so some very old specimens in the garden. But then we have all these which have just naturalised over time. They say roughly a foot of growth every 10 years, which is why people tend to want to buy trunked ferns, because obviously they can speed up time.
I haven't spent too much time, or I haven't really had my eye in as such, but are these in and around the valleys of Cornwall now?
I haven't really seen them. I haven't seen them naturalised so much. I think most of the gardens where they grow in are quite they're quite separate to any other sort of natural areas, I guess. A lot of the gardens are surrounded by farms or farmland, so you don't tend to get them sort of moving much out of the garden, I think. So they're very much sort of garden specific, I think. Maybe in time, as people buy them, take them, plant them in their gardens, maybe they'll gradually sort of move out. But I think it'd be a very slow process.
So while it is naturalising, it is not showing any invasive characteristics. So there's actually real value in having tree ferns here in Britain, culturally, ecologically, and also emotionally. They connect people to deep time, to the age of dinosaurs, to the lost forests of Gondwana. For many gardeners and visitors, they're not just plants, they're time machines. They also help raise awareness of temperate rainforests, a biome that exists both in Australia and in small fragments here in Britain. Seeing tree ferns thriving in Cornwall or Wales sparks curiosity, which can lead to conservation. But like with any non-native species, there are of course risks. Climate change is making the UK more hospitable to plants from warmer parts of the world. If tree ferns ever began to spread into the wild, they could potentially outcompete native ferns in sensitive habitats, especially in Britain's own rainforest fragments. Right now, there's no evidence of that happening. They are being well behaved, but it's a reminder that even the most beautiful guests still need watching. If you've enjoyed this, then be sure to check out this video here that's also been filmed at Treebo. It's on Brazil's giant leaves. Becoming a member is the best way to give and get more from Leaf Curious, so check that out. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Leaf Curious.